Good evening and welcome to the Redefining Workforce Engagement in the Wake of COVID-19 panel discussion. I am so grateful that you're tuning in and you're joining us on Facebook. Go ahead and do us a favor if, as you're watching, like, comment, share, let everyone know that we are on and we have really great discussions for you this evening. I am excited. I can't wait to introduce our panelists, so let's get into it. One of the things we want to talk about, obviously, there's been a huge shift in the landscape of our country and even globally when you think about COVID-19. When you add into the mix of 2020, COVID-19, the racial unrest, all of these things have an impact in how we interact with each other. Americans use the term workforce relationally and procedurally. In the wake of COVID, we've had to change the nature of our interactions with our peers, our employees, and employers. We've significantly altered our processes to accomplish even the most straightforward task. According to a pre-COVID-19 Forbes article, it's estimated that stress-related burnout costs anywhere from $125 to $150 billion a year in terms of healthcare costs in the US alone. In 2019, Gallup reported 23% of employees reporting feeling burnt out at work very often or always, while an additional 44% reported feeling it most of the time. In 2020, the work environment, as we've already stated, around the country has drastically shifted. And tonight, we're going to explore how the COVID-19 pandemic, racial tensions, and the current political climate have impacted the workforce. I want to say a brief thank you to the Indianapolis Recorder and to NO Power for assembling this powerhouse and dynamic panel group of women that we have here. And I'd like to take a moment to just introduce each and every person on the panel. Starting with myself, I'm Ryan Smith. I am the CEO and founder of the Curate Development Firm. I work with small business entities as well as educational institutions, helping them identify their brand story, helping them identify process improvement, and then also helping them lay foundations for success when it comes to future planning. I've been in the Indianapolis market for as long as I can live. I'm what you call a true Hoosier. I graduated from DePaul University and then recently graduated from the IU McKinney, Robert H. McKinney School of Law. With that being said, I want to turn it over to our panelists. Miss Alicia, I will let you take it and do a brief introduction.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia McCoy, founder and CEO of Peak Mind. We're a mental well-being platform empowering employees to thrive. I'm a champion of well-being, and I'm honored to be here tonight. So thank you for inviting me to speak on the panel. And I'd like to say I'm like Brené Brown. I'm a researcher. I study statistics and data worldwide. I have for the past 6 years on just this specific topic. That's a lot of research and data. And I've spoken to over 500 people personally myself about this specific topic. So I'm honored to be able to offer a tool that helps in this well-being and be a panelist tonight. Thank you.
All right, next up, Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Stephanie Bothan, and I'm the vice president and co-founder of an organization called Ascend Indiana. Before I tell you a little bit about Ascend, I'm certainly the least qualified person on this panel tonight, so I'm really grateful that these ladies are willing to bring me in and to the Indianapolis Recorder and NO Power for having the voice of Ascend in the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership today, and I'm excited to share some resources with you. But essentially what Ascend is a talent and workforce development initiative of the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership. And it's an organization that brings together industry, higher education, and philanthropic leaders really to advance our region's prosperity and growth. And our portion of that at Ascend is for our vision is for Indiana to be a place of economic opportunity for all. And so what we do is we bridge talent and communication gaps by creating connectivity between people and employers. And I'm thrilled to be here tonight to share a little bit about what we've been learning through this insane time and in this really unique moment in our history about what's happening with employers and talent and how we can better connect those folks as we go forward. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. And last but not least, Miss Elizabeth White.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm Elizabeth White. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and a licensed clinical addiction counselor. In 2011, I founded the Well Counseling and Consulting Group, which is a private practice on the northwest side of Indianapolis. And we serve Indianapolis with mental health counseling, family and marriage counseling. Our specialties are anxiety and depression, as well as issues that can affect couples and families. I'm also the team counselor for the Indianapolis Colts, so go Colts. And what I really want to be able to share with us today is hopefully some information and education regarding how our mental health can be affected by these topics, and then also be able to provide you with some resources. At the Well, we like to say that we are changing lives and mending hearts every day.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to set some kind of expectations for those of you who are tuning in. We're going to talk about wellness from the perspective of bouncing back from COVID and moving forward. And we're going to give you lots of tips that both employers and employees can utilize. But this conversation is definitely grounded in reality. And to give you an insight in what I mean by that, prior to hitting the little green button, we were all just quipping about making it through e-learning and work from home life balance. And so you are hearing from very real people who are managing this, these very big issues right alongside you. With that being said, what I would like to do is just dive right in. And this question is for every lady on this panel. Let's talk a little bit about the state of the workforce pre-COVID and then post-COVID. This is a question I pose to everyone. What, in your professional opinions, were some of the challenges that we were already seeing in the workforce prior to COVID-19?
Well, like I said, being somebody that studies data, you can look at the statistics. You know, you mentioned some of it, Ryan, to begin with. The U.S. on average prior to COVID spent $550 billion in losses. That's U.S. companies that spent money, didn't get profit because of disengagement. You know, just disengagement alone, let alone chronic stress, which adds up to billions of dollars of business loss prior to COVID. So we could only imagine what the ticker number is going to be next year when they have enough time to calculate the amount of business loss that we all, you know, if for small businesses, it's a tiny amount, but imagine if you're Amazon or Salesforce or one of the bigger companies.
Sure. Let's, for the sake of the types of individuals who are watching this, let's define engagement briefly for the folks watching. How would you define it?
Engagement can look like a lot of things, but if you look at the top 10 admitted reasons that people are disengaged, most of them, number one thing is they say that their management sucks. You know, for lack of a better word, they, you know, at work, they blame some reason on their management not performing to their standards. So that means that I don't have to perform to my highest and best. And so the top three things that people say when they're disengaged, they admit to sleeping at the job. They admit to spending 70 to 80% of their time on Facebook or Twitter. So they're getting a paycheck, but they're sitting on their phone looking at Facebook or Twitter all day. So those are some of the admitted reasons prior to COVID that employees say they do at work when they're disengaged and just don't care.
Sure. And from a practical standpoint, I spent a considerable amount of time working sales for the USA Today. And one of the things that we, you know, that's an organization, and you're talking about sales, productivity literally drives the bottom line in a sales organization. And that was something that we had to, you know, figure out a way to inspire, evoke change, what have you, because it does hurt as a company. It does hurt your bottom line. Let's pivot really quickly and shoot this question over to Elizabeth. When we talk about some of those challenges we were seeing in the workforce, how did well-being and the mental health space, how did that play into a factor of the workforce decline prior to COVID?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that happened was that what we referred to earlier was that burnout, and people were really having a hard time with trying to find what we call work-life balance, which really doesn't necessarily even exist. We probably need to change that language around that word balance. But people were really struggling with all of the responsibility for home and trying to maintain their own personal life, along with how to manage their responsibilities and duties at work. And so when we think about, for many people, work changed significantly with COVID, and kids were e-learning. So now we've added to that story, what does it look like to try to have balance when you're trying to work in one room and your kids are e-learning in the next room, and maybe your spouse is downstairs and everybody's with everybody all day long. It really just started to pile up as the number of stressors just grew.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. I think that's a really good point to make, right? You have these added stressors that are already in place. And I think it's an interesting place to be in, because I think that as a workforce, employers were just getting ready to like address these issues, because you saw every company coming out with a wellness program and mental health. And I just, it's like you get so far and then a global pandemic happens. And so let's talk really quickly. What were some things that we're seeing trend-wise that employers were getting correctly prior to COVID?
Yeah, I think a lot of employers were using their EAPs, their employee assistance programs, which allowed employees to have maybe 1 to 7 sessions that were free with a mental health counselor. And I think that's definitely one area where employers got it right.
Stephanie, you were going to say something?
Oh, sure. I'm happy to. Yeah, I think I can speak a little bit to both questions, more from the global perspective. These ladies are certainly the experts on this topic. I think when we talk about how did we get there to that burnout and that stress, what I wanted to highlight is what we've learned, what we heard from employers prior to the pandemic. Some of the challenges were they were not able to find the workforce that had the skills and talent that they said they needed, right? And a lot of what we learned here is that it's a lot of small misses. We have a lot of great talent, but maybe they don't have the financial or social capital to find the job, or vice versa. The employer doesn't have the reach or hasn't made the investment in finding those individuals, which it may be a little more challenging and take more time to do. So when we talk about burnout and stress, we were in a labor market where our talent, most people had a job, it maybe wasn't a good job, but that was also leading to a ton of extra challenges because there were lots of jobs that were unfilled. Maybe somebody was carrying more than one job, 1.5 or 2 jobs, because a certain job hadn't been filled. Maybe they were having to do training on top of doing their job because they needed to upskill to be able to, stay on top of the most emerging technologies that are coming at us very rapidly every day. I think in addition, we have certain fields, and many of you, Alicia and Elizabeth, you work in these fields where we just do not produce enough talent as a state, whether that's nursing, that's mental and behavioral health, but we're not isolated to those areas. But those are some of the areas too, where, when we don't produce enough talent, it leads to extra burden on everybody who's working in that field. And then finally, we have lots of people doing lots of great things. There are lots of programs in our city and in our state, but a lot of that is disconnected from one another. And so a lot of what we've been seeing, I think, that has needed to be done, and really why I said was created, was to try to address a lot of those challenges. And Ryan, I could not agree with you more that so many employers were starting to say, our people have had enough, it's too much stress, we have got to solve these problems. And Ascend has been lucky because we've been, on the front lines of working to build talent pipelines in partnership with our employers to say, hey, you've got a persistent and stubborn challenge of all these jobs that you can't fill. These are good jobs, these are middle wage, middle skill, or above jobs. How do we help you find that talent and make sure that you're a part of not just consuming that talent, but producing it alongside our educational institutions and community-based organizations?
I think that's a really good point that you brought up, Stephanie, because really, in hindsight, it's 2020, because I think that a part of this conversation should have included higher education. Because when you talk about workforce development, what we're talking about is essentially preparing that workforce. We say we can't find talent, and we have an entire generation of folks who don't know what they want to do with their lives. And so when we talk about guided pathways and highlight, I think that is reason enough for us to have another round of this discussion. So the next time we do this, we want to add in higher education for those who are listening. But I think that that's important because what we're talking about is really workforce development, but the problem is so much further back. Like, how do we equip people and the types of individuals we're looking for to stick and stay? And then it goes to how are we supporting them once they're in the workforce? I think there's a couple of other questions that I want to move on to, but Alicia, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, I literally just left a meeting talking about K-12 and how do we prepare them, especially for my industry that's tech. When I want to hire developers, that are minority and women, we don't have that pipeline, like Stephanie said. And I left a meeting with InnoPower talking about how do we get that talent in K-12 and educate their minds that there's an opportunity for them. So you're right. There's a lot of discussions happening. We're still not there, but it's definitely more discussions necessary.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point that echoes what Stephanie said. A lot of times we are working in silos, right? You have all of these great individuals with these great ideas, and oftentimes, to move the needle forward, we really have to drop our biases and figure out how to work together to move this entire industry forward. Let's shift really quickly because we have a ton of questions and I want to give everyone an opportunity to shine in their expertise. Let's talk about, now that we acknowledge the issues that were pre-existent with the workforce and the challenges that we were already facing, let's talk a little bit more about compounding those issues with work from home. Are we seeing more or less productivity? Are there boundary issues? Those are the things that I think people, and how do we manage them, right? That's what employers want to know. How do we fix the broken?
I think one thing to remember too, I've seen conflicting data coming in. Again, sorry, I always go back to data. I'm a data geek. But you hear one set of statistics and then you hear another, and I'm in the business of asking people those questions. And so I ask CEOs what they're expecting, and Gallup just asked CEOs nationwide as well. And what I heard from there was that out of 30,000 companies, they expect 80% of their workforce to return to the office. So from a CEO's mindset, 80%, we expect you to come back to the office. 20% can work from home, a little bit over 20%. But I think when you ask people, which we also do you want to stay working from home? There's a large number, 50, 60% that I'm seeing that want to work from home. And so I think you talk about mental well-being. I think there's this teeter-totter between the people who want to stay working from home versus the employers that want people to come back. So I think, we can speak to that as well.
Yeah. Anybody else want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point because we are still talking about the disconnect between the employer and the employee, and the expectations and where those come from. And so, like, as I referenced earlier, when we're thinking about work-life balance, some people have found that working from home now has made some of that a little bit easier for them. And so the idea of going back to work is actually triggering a lot of anxiety about what life will look like once they're back in a commute and having to pick kids up from school. I've had many people say to me that they really have used this time to really find a more peaceful way of living, and the hustle and bustle, the lack of hustle and bustle works for them. So some of those people are a little bit anxious about what it's going to look like to go back to their regular duties as it relates to being in office.
I think you bring up a really interesting dynamic. I personally am the total opposite of those folks you just referenced. And so for me, when I work from home, and because I don't have a commute, so I work with my therapist, which I think everyone should have a therapist. That's just my personal opinion. When I work with my therapist, we talk about using my drive time as a way to come down from my day. And so I find that when I don't have those breaks, I just work all day. Like, I'm up, my phone, emails going, there's no boundaries. And my son comes home, he's like, you've been on your computer all day. Well, and that's a reminder to me that I have to set different boundaries. And those of you who are watching and are CEOs and owners of companies, maybe, what do you think the response is when you send an employee an email at 7 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, because you're up and your brain is firing? What kind of tension or anxiety does that create in your immediate workforce, and how do you remedy that? Those are small things, but those things produce stressors on the workforce.
Right. A lot of people say that when you're at your office, 5 o'clock comes and most people are walking out. So that's a mental cue for you. Even if you don't leave, it's a mental cue for you to say, oh, it's checkout time. Maybe I should be thinking about other things to do. And so you have that representation. When you're at home, you don't have that. You're sitting on your sofa all day or in your kitchen. And so there's no mental cue to remind us to clock out. And so it is hard.
Yeah. I just want to add really quick, Ryan, sorry, that I think too, like it's kind of a double-edged sword, because what I've tried to do with my team is give them the flexibility that they ask for. So I have a staff member who has a son who's been e-learning, and sometimes she works late at night because that is her best time. So she's sending emails. I'm trying to be responsive. I have my kids at home. And so I am sending emails probably at crazy times throughout the day. And the intention is not to create anxiety, but it's trying to be responsive in this environment. Whereas before I could control that more. Maybe the work arrangement was that cue of I'm here during this to this, but now I feel like I need to be, as a manager, more responsive and allow me to have that flexibility. But I think that creates anxiety on both sides. I think it's just a big challenge.
I think what you've said and what you've highlighted is that you're communicative in this process, right? So I think one of the things that was said prior to us, again, we were having conversation before we hit the little green button, was about giving grace, right? This is definitely a time, this is not the time to be like America's worst boss. Like that's probably not gonna work well for you. So this is the time to give and receive grace, because we're all going through it, and we're just trying to come out whole on the other side. I really like what you said about healing earlier. Elizabeth, I think that is important. Other comments or questions before we move on to the next?
I think, just the other thing I think about that I hear a lot and am starting to talk to CEOs and our clients about is when you talk about work from home and going back to the new norm, we have to also remember that people are doing things today that they've never done before. And what is that going to cause us in 2.5 years? Because following any pandemic, you always have 2.5 years on average of a mental well-being crisis that follows. And so some of the things that I challenge people to think about, especially in HR, is we are in a new norm. And so the CEO that's doing a Zoom call with an employee, if she's in her bedroom because her kids are being crazy in the kitchen and she had to go to her bedroom, they're now seeing an employee's bedroom. That's something that's never been done before, really, in our norm before. And yet now we're going to carry that into when you go back to the office. And so think about the inner dynamics and the closeness that people have had during the pandemic when you're Zooming from people's homes, right? You have a different connection. And some people are not able to disconnect that personal situation back to the office situation. And so I just challenge people to think about when we go back to the office, there are going to be new situations that arise that are not appropriate situations because of what we've had to deal with in this crisis.
You said a mouthful. So what I heard what resonated with me was how do we set best practices in an unpredictable time? So there's that. And then turn around and there's this closeness, but we are far apart, obviously, because we're doing this Zoom. So there's this false sense of intimacy that we all have with each other that screens automatically generate. I can't tell you how many times people on social media think that they know me because they follow on a platform, but we don't know each other at all. So there's this pseudo intimacy that happens. And so how do you navigate that post returning to the workforce? I don't know that I have that answer. But
I'm sure Elizabeth can talk to boundaries, most people don't have a healthy sense of boundaries. And I'm sure that's what most therapists talk to their patients about. And so that's something that we have to be cognizant of as we go back to the workplace. And leaders, I say this all day long, that leaders and HR managers are not supposed to be therapists. So I say to people, make sure to reach out to those resources that we're going to leave at the end and utilize the resources and prepare yourself with the dialogue to communicate, like you said, what are the best practices and what are the boundaries that we have to remember and respect?
Yeah. And I want to pivot because I really want to give Elizabeth time to talk to this next. I'm putting you on the hot seat, ma'am. I want to talk, our second topic tonight is the topic of racial tension, the current political climate, and the workforce. And I think that this is such an important dialogue, especially as we have employers who are tuning in and you're looking to make really lasting positive change, not brand change, right? Because we've all seen it. We've all seen the big companies that have, turned their Instagram square black for a day, but we haven't seen any changes in terms of equity behind the scenes or in the boardroom. So I want to have this conversation. So let's talk about social unrest and racism from kind of that top-down perspective. I don't know about you ladies, and I know that brown people are not, Black and brown people are not monolithic in our experiences, but I think it's safe to say that we're tired. I'm tired, okay? And so when I think about the workforce, one of the first things that comes to mind as a person of color and a woman would be microaggressions. And I feel like as a culture, we have just learned to either accept them and take them on the chin, or we've internalized them. But I think we're at a point where we can't internalize anymore. So what are some what are some strategies that companies can put in place to actually hear those microaggressions? And then how can we as the workforce cope and deal and manage those microaggressions without exploding? Because I think that's just where people are.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things regarding this topic is that we have to validate that this is traumatic. We're talking about race-based traumatic stress. And so when this happens, it's going to be important for employers to validate the experiences of their employees that are going through this process, right? And one of the things that we know is that it can be systemic racism that a person could experience. It could be vicarious. They're watching something happen to someone else, or it could be personal and directed. It's something that specifically happened to them. And each one of those experiences can have a different emotional fallout. But the thing that we have to do to begin with is that we have to validate that this is traumatic and that it is stressful. It is a mental and emotional injury. So that's the first thing, is that we got to all agree that this is really our starting place, and then we'll figure out where to go from there. So some next steps, one of the things I've been happy with that I've seen with employers is we've been invited in to have some of these conversations about what a company can do to start to acknowledge this and to deal with this with their employees. And we've been able to host some online experiences where we're having these no holds barred conversations with employees about their experiences in the workplace. So that means that we have to, number one, agree that this is a problem. Then we have to, number two, make space for the honest and concrete conversation regarding what the experiences are of the employees. And then we can figure out our action steps for what we can do to start to shift dynamics within the company or the corporation. But I think the first thing is just, we got to all be honest that this is going on. It's not something to be overlooked. We are tired of having to go this route. And it is everybody's problem. It is not only the problem of Black and brown people, because we all live in this planet, on this planet together, in this city and state together, and it's got to be done. So the first one is just to start off with the truth, the facts, and then we can start to have that conversation.
And I like how you put it. You said we have to make space for those conversations. I think that's really important. And I also think that it's important as a person of color who I work for myself now, because I've had really intense conversations about the same topic. And so as a former employee, I remember working and being questioned about my body of work and told that I was too close to a situation because I was essentially an African-American woman. And it was an issue about, we're dealing with marketing and branding, and you have to be careful about your messaging that you put out. But at the time, I was told that I was overly sensitive, don't you think? And my response in that moment was, no, I don't. And I had to, for the first time in my professional career, put both feet on the ground, articulately, calmly, and intelligently defend my body of work. But my next question is, what happens when you're not equipped as a person of color to defend your body of work, or even know how to even navigate that conversation? Because I see so many people who are just throwing in the towel, and you have people who are blowing up, and how do we fix that?
Therapy. No, I say that jokingly, but not jokingly, that you have to have a space to talk. You have to have a space to vent, and you have to understand a safe space and an intelligent space. Sometimes venting to your friends may not be the appropriate space to vent if they're just gaslighters, or they're just going to fire you up in a negative way and not move to action and not move to positive action. And so therapists are trained to talk and cope through positive methods and intelligent methods. And so I think that there is a case for telehealth and therapy and other positive ways of coping through some of that stress, because we all, get to a point, everybody's boiling point is different on different topics. and you're going to get there. If you don't have coping skills in place, when you boil over, it turns into riots and destruction and negativity and self hatred and all those depression and suicide, and we could go on. And so what are those coping skills that you have in place? I think is a great question for everybody to ask, because we're in a time of crisis. But if this crisis didn't get you, there's going to be another crisis at some point in your adult life that's going to get you. So you have to prepare yourself mentally. And I think Elizabeth could speak better to that than I could.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it takes us back to what you were saying earlier, Ryan, about boundaries and what that looks like. I think it was Ryan, about boundaries. And so one of the things that I'm encouraging Black and brown people to do in those spaces is to identify their own boundaries. Like, it is not your responsibility in the workplace to answer for an entire community every time an issue like this rises. And it's really okay if you choose to share your experience or to educate other people about your experience. That's fine, and that can be healthy, but you are under no obligation to do so. And so it's really okay to say, you know what, I really don't want to talk about that today, or I don't think this is an appropriate time to talk about it, or maybe I don't feel like talking about it right now. Like, to be able to give that no, to say, this is where I am on this, if it's something that's going to be hard for you to deal with. And I think the pressure point is that so many times Black and brown people feel compelled to have to answer for the entire community. And it's not our responsibility, and it's not fair.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And, to speaking to CEOs and leaders who might not be Black and brown, that, they're at the point, I've heard the word, they're getting exhausted too from trying to put programs out there. And the thing I will say to them is, guess what? Like Ryan said, if we're exhausted, you might have to be exhausted too. This is not an easy task. And so if both of us step up and say, we're going to do the work, the community and the leaders and the management that's over 50% white males in America, if we're being honest, you're going to get a little exhausted too. And I think it's okay for us both. But if we're working together in partnership for the greater good, then I think that we can remember that this is going to be a challenge. It's not going to happen overnight. That's why it's called systemic, and it's called a long time journey.
So let's talk about the work, right? Because we all say do the work, but from a corporate standpoint, what does the work look like? Because this brings up a whole host of conversational issues when people talk about, preferential treatment, or, what does the work look like? What does programming look like? I know a lot of my recruiter friends, after Breonna Taylor was murdered, a lot of my recruiter friends just posted on social media about how they could not bring themselves to get on a Zoom call and continue life as normal. And, people saying, hey, how you doing? Just the general niceties without an acknowledgement that people were hurting. So what are some very practical resources and tools that from a workforce standpoint, employers can begin to effectuate to create this change?
Yeah, I think the first one is, again, that acknowledgement. I've talked to so many people whose employers have not addressed this issue at all. And so they're acting like it's not happening. They're not, there's no corporate communication, there's no staff meeting, there's no email to acknowledge that this is going on or that it could be affecting the employees negatively. And so the first part about that is the acknowledgement of it. And I know that some people are intimidated because the conversation can be heavy, because the conversation can trigger a lot of different emotions in all of us because of the different experiences we bring to the table. But I think if we don't do that, the outcome is so bad, is so terrible that we're going to have to go ahead and take the pain of having the conversations.
Yeah.
Individually, I'm encouraging people to do their soul care, which is just to know what they need to do. So for that person who really doesn't have the energy to log into the Zoom that day because they've heard another outcome that is horrific, then don't log into the Zoom. Like, it really is appropriate to use your, to take a day off, or to flex your time, or whatever you need to do to not have to be there. And then I think just basic self-care strategies will still work, such as exercising, trying to get good sleep. And most of all, at a time like this, it's important for employees to know who they can connect with, whether that's in the workplace or outside of it. But connection at a time like this is essential. We have to really lean on each other.
Yeah, I think that's important too. And when I think about strategies that companies can employ, I think it starts with hiring. And we've already talked about, how colleges and universities play a role in this new wave of progress when it comes to the workforce. But I think if a company is looking to fix the climate in their organization, it starts with taking a look at who's filling your seats, addressing inequity head on. I think that is extremely important. I think it is the responsibility and the professional responsibility of any company who employs individuals to make sure that there are brown faces, Black and brown faces that occupy not just entry-level positions, but that occupy key seats in leadership. I think you have to look at those things realistically. I'll give you an example. I work with schools. Most of the schools I work with are in our charter schools. And then I also work with some universities. Well, a lot of times what I run into are marketing firms that also work with these same charter schools and are putting out their message, but they have no Black or brown faces on staff. And when we are good enough as an organization, as a community to pay you our dollars, you should have people on staff that look like us so that our message is carried forward. And to me, that is a fix. It's a quick fix that you can employ. And I think it's culturally sensitive. Some things that companies can do, it's not rocket science. And that's the kind of, but it does require responsibility. And I love seeing people hold companies responsible to make sure that equity is being spread.
Yeah, I just want to jump in, Ryan, real quick on that, and couldn't agree more that kind of the different phases of the life cycle of talent all have to be considered as a package when we're talking about a full-on DE&I strategy at a company. And so I love that you started with recruitment because, it's unfortunate that we're at a time in history where this wasn't top of mind until we had a racial reckoning in our society, but we've had it now. So now we have even more doors open to say, you need to do something about this. And hey, let us help you figure out how to do something. And so I just want to highlight that I have been incredibly pleased with the number of our employer partners who are reaching out to us saying, how do I get connected to HBCUs? How do I get connected to La Plaza and Urban League and, all the different community-based organizations and institutions, Martin University here locally, who are really working to educate and support that diverse talent pipeline. And I've just been thrilled to see that uptick. Also, the Ascend Network, which is our tech platform that matches people with jobs, that network is really supportive of building social and economic capital for those people who maybe don't have access to those networks. So who's using our network disproportionately? First generation students, people of color, and those that do not have the same potentially networks in social and economic capital. And so I think as this crisis continues to unfold, I think there's just this unique moment in time where we've got to jump in and say, you have to act. And we have to be, we see ourselves as like, what are all the ways we can lift up those organizations that are doing that good work and also change our practices and look internally to say, how do we pivot our efforts now to even more intentionally focus in that space? And so I'll give employers a little credit there because I think they are asking those questions and we got to figure out collectively how to make that happen.
Well, it's like you said earlier, we have to come out of those silos, right? We have to come together. And shout out to my client, Martin University, because they are currently enrolling for classes this spring. Just the record. So with that being said, I want to pivot really quickly. Stephanie, I think you were very eloquent in saying that, hey, these questions are being asked, but now we have to do the work, the bridge work to connect resources with people to kind of pull everyone up. And I think that that's fantastic. And I think there's a lot of work to be done there. And hopefully more conversations like this will actually lay out a blueprint for how to do that. I was going to ask the question, are the significant workforce changes that we need to see realistic? But I think we're answering that as we go. I think it is realistic, may not all happen today. We don't know how much of this is going to roll out in the next year, but I am optimistic and I hope that we see real change because we've been here before as a country. But I think this is still different on some levels. And I want to ask, I asked about coping. We asked about how, as people of color, we can find strength. Let's talk about moving the needle forward. I think in terms of time, we have roughly under 30 minutes, and I want to make sure that we address this. Let's talk about those tips and resources that employers can take advantage of. I'm going to default to Stephanie here to start us off. Let's talk about different things and different ways that companies can kind of push forward with both a COVID response strategy and then a response to racial tension.
Perfect. So I will probably be the broadest answer to this and let my experts across the aisle here be able to answer more deeply in their fields. But just at a high level, I do want to say a few things that we've seen. So the recruitment piece is one of them. I think that's a place everyone should start and look at where talent is coming from. I thought you nailed that, Ryan. I think another piece is compensation and benefits. So how are you ensuring that you are compensating effectively and appropriately? And how are you looking at compensation holistically? So days off. I know a lot of companies gave election day off because that's a very important civic duty. I also have noticed a lot of companies looking for HR related consultants and trainings so that they can respond very practically and tactically to the issues that their employees are escalating. And then I think another thing I've been really thrilled with is just that so many employers are thinking about, how do I upskill, reskill, and partner with educational institutions? Sorry, that's my sort of bread and butter in space. But
let's talk about time.
That's right. How do I advance my workforce? Because we need to make sure that we continue to upskill and reskill and retool as we continue to move forward. So 2 resources concretely I want to share with you that can, I think, be helpful as we move forward. One is both for employers, if you're an employer on this call and you have hiring needs, or if you are someone who is looking for a job, a dislocated worker, and has been impacted by this pandemic. So recently, at the request of Mayor Hogsett, our regional workforce partnership came together to respond to the pandemic and said, what can we do to get people back to work? How can we help address, 16 to 20% unemployment that we're facing across our country? And so what we did is we launched a free tool. It is an adapted version of our Ascend Network technology platform that matches individuals to talent. And we've provided that website so that anybody who is looking for a job can go on, answer just a couple of quick questions, and we will get you connected to the job opportunities that exist. We will also get you connected to a person if that's what you need, or to additional training and resources if that is what you need. So the website for that is employindy.org/rapid reemployment response. And I think my tech friends are going to make sure that gets posted. The second thing I just want to briefly mention, and again, if you're an employer or talent, go check that out and let's see if we can get you your job filled or get you a job. From there, the second thing I just want to mention is EmployIndy and Ascend also recently launched a modern youth apprenticeship pilot. I just want to make sure we remember that we have a generation of youth right now who are at significant risk of disconnection from society. They've had their social networks ripped away from them. They're navigating very challenging transitions in their life at a time when transitioning is challenging in general. And so we just launched a high school to post-secondary program called Modern Apprenticeship, and it's really focused on high school students being able to work and learn. They get paid, they get the social capital, the economic capital, they learn on the job, and then they are getting post-secondary credentials and credit that will really enable them to figure out where they want to go next. It's not the end of their journey, it's the beginning of their journey. And the goal is choices at the end of it. How do they have more choices coming out of that experience? So if you're interested, if you're a business and you're interested in this as a DE&I strategy, or if you are a student or a parent of a student who thinks this is something of interest, we also have a website for you. It's just indiemodernapprenticeship.com. Go check it out. If you reach out to us, we will connect with you, whether you're a parent, a student, or an employer. And we would love to get you connected into that effort. So thanks, Ryan, for the chance to share a little bit about what we're doing.
That's awesome. Alicia, did you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, pivoting on apprenticeship, I agree. I just spent yesterday talking to 2 different groups about apprenticeships and how the state supports them, but isn't doing yet enough. And so people like Stephanie and I and our companies are going to do more to make sure that those exist. And, companies like Be Nimble is one I'll shout out. She's focused on Black and Brown developers in the tech community. And so, I think she's got some announcement coming up that might be focused on apprenticeship, and 1150 Academy just, had a meeting with them as well. And so for the tech industry, I think that's really trying to push those forward and do great things. But as far as resources in the mental well-being space, which is my sweet spot, Indiana has stepped up this year and got some grant dollars to put together more focus on telehealth and resources for people who are struggling with mental well-being. And so bewellindiana.com is one that is going to be shared at the end of this that, I advocate for, because it's got a lot of things from free rent to free therapy to subsidized therapy, for a lot of people, for the greater community. It's all in the mental well-being space, and how do we, for Hoosiers facing unique challenges during COVID. So that's a great resource, but also our platform. That's what we're here for, for companies that are that 10, 20% that are doing culture right and really caring about mental well-being. They're going to use our platform, and we have hundreds of resources for employees to take on their own individual journey. Instead of waiting for your employer to tell you, hey, we got a new resource for you, we're empowering employees to say, hey, employer, here's a resource that I know that you can provide on our behalf. And so that's what our company focuses on, is empowering employees to take control of their own well-being journey in a company and to support their employers when they may not have. But also for D&I want to shout out a couple good people. Canaries just got a big grant, got funded, and Canaries is holding companies accountable. They're a great D&I and diversity, equity, and inclusion company that's supporting tracking the numbers. Instead of just saying you have a program, they're going to support companies and they're going to track the number to see how well you're doing DE&I, as well as we've got a couple great people here in the Indianapolis location, lead at any level, and Lindsay Picardo are great people you can bring into your company if you need help with that.
That's great. That's great. Want to pivot? Anyone else?
Yeah, one of the things I've been thinking about, Ryan, is the importance of embedding mental health workers in the corporation. So that's really what I do when I'm with the Colts. Is I actually have an office there. I'm actually available on site 3 days a week to be able to provide services if someone needs that. And so eliminating or reducing the access to the services is a major component of being able to be really responsive to COVID-19, the changes that have been experienced, as well as the race-based trauma. The other one is to clearly communicate the resources that are available and bulk up the benefits packages that include mental health responsiveness, whether that's through an EAP or whether that's through making sure that that is a good policy benefit that's on their employee benefits package. The other one is education and having a response team to respond to these crises in real time when they happen, whether it's related to just mental health or whether it's related to a race-based trauma event. And also, I've really been hearing in my community that employees are happy when their employers are bringing in specific people as diversity and inclusion officers. It provides this other layer of support, because many times people of color don't believe they can bring their concerns to their employers because of some backlash or some sort of retaliation. And the presence of these people who are hopefully trained in those positions to be able to advocate and work with the employees that's really provided a sense of relief and peacefulness for employees.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up, because there was a question that came up, and I'm just going to read it. It said, it sounds like a major root of so many of these issues is the lack of communication between employer and employee. How would you recommend improving this line of communication? And I'll let any of you ladies answer that, but I thought that was relevant to what you just shared.
Exactly. Surveys are great. A lot of people are using engagement surveys. However, there are some new ones that are anonymous boxes. That's one thing that we work with our clients to offer them as resources, is use the ones that are technology that it's not tracked. It's not like MailChimp, how you know who responds. It's anonymous feedback. And if in the work from home life, you can't just drop something in a note in a box. And so there are technologies that are hitting the market during COVID that are anonymous. So I think those are great. And something to piggyback off of that is, when you look at resources nationwide before COVID, companies were spending $500 per employee on wellness products, programs, any type of thing. I think that we can still use that $500. If I was a company, I would plead to you to use the $500 per employee. What some of them are doing is saying, we'll give $250 cash to you a month, to just spend however you want, whether it's on therapy or bath bombs, a spa day, whatever you need to use it for. I think setting a budget is also a call to action. If we don't have a budget in mind, then it's hard to say to your employees how we're going to support you.
Right. And we talk about that being that practical step that an employer can take. I want to go back to what Elizabeth said in the beginning. When we talk about doing these surveys, you have to first make space to acknowledge that there's an issue. So it's hard work, but it's heart work. Right. And so sometimes we have to check our feelings at the door to hear what other people have to say. And so those are some very real actionable steps that you can take as a company to begin to repair the gap or the chasm in your workforce. Anyone else want to add to that? Awesome.
You may hear things that you're not ready for, and I would plead that to, again, my white CEOs and leaders, because I feel like I'm a therapist, Elizabeth, sometimes when I'm talking to my CEOs. I just let them talk to me. So that's what I hear all week, is them say how hard it is. And the words that they hear does hurt their heart, because they're trying their best. And I think that some people are trying, even though they're white and they're our allies, they're trying. They may say the wrong words. So please have grace with them through that. Know that the ones that are trying, we need to support them if we are Black and brown, and tell them, maybe don't use that word next time, or maybe ask a person who is Black and brown before you roll out a program and see if we actually want that. Those are some of the common things that I hear.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Elizabeth, Stephanie, anything else on that point?
No, just I know a lot of what we do in our talent work is we do focus groups, and certainly I want to be cognizant of the fact, Elizabeth, to your point, it's not the work of the Black and brown people to educate everyone else, but we like to create the forum by which the folks that do want to speak into that have a chance. And a lot of times hiring a consultant is a helpful buffer, because as a consultant in there, I'm not speaking on behalf of an individual person. I'm speaking on behalf collectively of a group of people with what they've shared. And so that's just one other strategy I think we've used in partnership with companies, and I've seen others use as well, because surveys I think are really wonderful and a great jumping off point. But I learn a lot by taking that survey and going to people, to Alicia's point, and trying to unpack what to do with the survey results. And I think that's where that translation really can come to life, is through those conversations after you get data and information to move your organization forward.
I really like that point. I really like that. Okay, we have about 8 minutes, and I want to give each one of you an opportunity to, as questions come in, I'm happy to answer those, but I want to give you each an opportunity to let the folks at home who are tuning in know where they can find you, how they can engage with you, the services that you offer, and anything else that you feel is pertinent for them to know. We'll start with Alicia.
Awesome. Well, we're available online or via phone call. I think our information is going to be shared at the end of this, but feel free to reach out to us. What we provide is coping, education, and understanding of how employees and employers can learn to cope through the mental well-being challenges before COVID and post, COVID. And so we're empowering employees to take responsibility for their own life journey, because we bring ourselves to our companies. We don't leave ourselves at the door. And so you have to acknowledge that we're human beings, and we're going to bring our emotional well-being and our mental well-being to work, whether you like it or not. And if you want to save that $550 billion that I started the conversation by, if you want to save that and make it into profit, then you have to invest in the well-being of your employees. And guess what? Our brain is a muscle. If we actually work it and we exercise it and we talk through the challenges, there's a thing called neuroplasticity that I'm not educated enough to talk about, but I know it exists. And that if you actually use it and work your brain muscle, hope and through coping skills, we can actually learn new ways to be, which means that we can be more productive and more profitable for our companies. And so if we just have to empower our employees to have the tools to be successful. And that's what Peak Mind does, is we're the technology that's the tool. Your HR manager doesn't have to remind your employees to think and to work that muscle. Our technology will do that. So it'll save you in litigation so that your HR doesn't get sued. And we'll bring a little piece of Elizabeth to you. You know, we bring a little 3 to 5 minute moments from hundreds of experts like Elizabeth. We're not meant to replace experts. They are definitely in our resource list because you're going to need them. You're going to need to spend time investing in therapy and coping skills and coaching moments. But we can give you those 3 to 5 minute moments to cope through the mental well-being.
Thank you. Stephanie?
Yeah, I've learned so much from the panelists tonight. So thank you for spending the time educating me, first of all. Second of all, I just deeply believe that Indianapolis and Indiana has an opportunity here to be a place where economic opportunity and mobility is not just an idea, but it is a reality. And I think, if you want to find out more about what we're doing at Ascend in partnership with our community, you can find us at ascendindiana.com. But regardless of that, we've talked a lot about talent, and a lot of my work over the past 5 to 10 years has been around how do we connect people to jobs on behalf of economic mobility. And what I'm really pleased by, I'm not pleased by how we got here, but what I'm pleased by is that we have really expanded our definition of what talent development and talent strategies mean. I think as we look at mental health and as we look at racial reconciliation, and again, we have this moment now where we can see that broader umbrella. And so my charge for our company and for all of us is, as employers, how do we step into that, push into that, and have those hard conversations and be willing to learn and be willing to make that a part of our strategy overall. And then on the talent side, I just want to encourage you that there are a lot of people out here who believe in you. And even if you have not had opportunities in your life, or you've lost your job, or something has not gone your way time and time again, there are people out there in our community who care about you and want to get you connected and want to help you find that opportunity that's going to lead to whatever it is you're looking for in your life. And so I'm optimistic as we head into 2021, and I'm really excited for what this year, despite how hard and challenging it was. I think what's going to come and the opportunities on the other side are just plentiful. So thanks for having me tonight.
Yes, thank you. And last but not least, Mr. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Stephanie said, that this crisis is really an opportunity for us to change the way that we've been living in the workplace and at home if we use the resources that are available to us to be able to start to shift that. So I want to encourage employers to acknowledge the fact that employees returning to the office next year, if they're going to be physically in the office, they may be different when they come back. There are people who have lost people during this COVID-19, people who have become more isolated because they haven't been able to be around their loved ones or their friends as much as they'd like to. And life is just really going to be different for some people. And so acknowledging that is going to be a great place to start. And then we have to be willing to have that courageous conversation, which is talking about these tough subjects and holding space for the fact that we bring all of these experiences to this topic. And the way you can do that as an employer is to bring us in to help you. Bring in all the consultants to help you and to support you with having this conversation for your employees. Now, for the employees, for those of us that have had a hard time with COVID-19 or don't know how to access some of the resources, you can find me at www.thewellcounselinggroup.com. I think our host is going to put that in the chat for you guys. At the top right-hand corner of that homepage, you can do an emotional checkup, which is just kind of check in with yourself about some sleeping and how you're doing emotionally, and it'll give you some feedback at the end of that assessment. And I always like to say that if you are considering suicide, like if this has just been such a tough period for you, that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. So we want you to hang on. And the suicide prevention hotline phone number is 800-273-8255, 800-273-8255. And I think they're going to put that in the chat for us as well. And so thanks so much for having me. And I'm just wishing everybody a great finish to 2020 and a fantastic start to 2021.
Yes, thank you so much. Again, I just want to say thank you to all of these ladies that have joined us on this panel. If you're tuning in, we thank you for just spending the evening with us. Thank you again to NO Power Indy and the Indianapolis Recorder for making this dialogue possible. We hope that you will like and share. As I said, this will be available on the Facebook page. And if you have questions, you can reach out to the Indianapolis Recorder or NO Power, and I'm sure they would be more than happy to connect you with the resources we saw today. So this is Ryan Smith with the Curate Development Firm. Thank you for watching.